Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're jumping straight into the core concepts from Saifedean Ammousa's highly debated book, The Bitcoin Standard. We're going to take a deep dive into the history of money and look at the controversial rise of a decentralized alternative to central banking. Whether you're already deeply embedded in the financial world or you're just kind of curious about how all this actually works, we're going to look strictly at the arguments laid out in the source material so we can really understand the mechanics behind this movement. Okay, so here's our roadmap for today. We'll be covering the rise of Bitcoin, the fiat money problem, solving for digital scarcity, a permissionless financial system, and finally, exploring whether this is a Ponzi scheme or a revolution. Let's get right into it. Now, before we even touch the complex tech, the book hits us with a highly relatable question that we really need to sit with. Why does the current financial system feel so broken? To grasp the emotional core of this whole topic, the author suggests we have to look at the everyday, very real frustrations people feel about their money and their losing purchasing power. It's exactly that widespread frustration that paved the way for a radical alternative. Section 1. The Rise of Bitcoin, From Geeks to Wall Street. And wow, the journey from an obscure cryptography mailing list to mainstream finance is absolutely wild. When you look at it, the evolution here is incredibly rapid. It kicks off on November 1st, 2008, when the pseudonymous Satoshi Nakamoto sent out an email outlining a peer-to-peer electronic cash system. By 2009, the very first block was mined, and a price was calculated just based on the electricity needed to produce it. Then we get the legendary 2010 transaction. Someone literally bought 2 pizzas for 10,000 bitcoins, marking its first use as a medium of exchange. Fast forward a bit to 2021, and El Salvador actually adopts it as legal tender to promote financial inclusion. And finally, that brings us to the monumental 2024 spot ETF approvals in the US and Hong Kong, putting it on equal footing with legacy commodities. Now, you really want to pay attention to that 2024 milestone. The author notes that the approval of these ETFs was a total watershed moment. Why? Well, because it essentially provided legal clarity. You see, for years, one of the biggest fears out there was that governments would just flat out ban the technology. The ETFs removed that fear, put Bitcoin on an equal footing with established assets like gold, and, crucially, opened the floodgates for non-tech-savvy people to participate easily right through their traditional brokerage accounts. Moving right along to Section 2, the fiat money problem, debasement and inflation. This brings us to the macroeconomic thesis of the book, identifying a massive systemic flaw in how our money currently operates. To truly understand this flaw, we have to look back at a massive historical shift. We used to operate on a gold standard. That meant currency was actually backed by finite physical gold sitting in bank vaults. Because gold is incredibly hard and energy-intensive to mine, governments couldn't just create money out of thin air to fund new programs or wars. They had to either find more gold or tax their citizens. But then, in 1971, the US dollar went off the gold standard. This created the fiat system, suddenly allowing governments to print virtually endless amounts of unbacked currency. And there is a profound psychological toll to this infinite printing. The source material highlights that everyday people experience this as a constant, draining loss of purchasing power. A really great example cited in the book is someone trying to save for a house in Sweden. The house prices go up way faster than you could ever possibly save your money. You are literally running faster just to stay in exactly the same place financially. So what we end up with is this completely unsustainable economic cycle. The convenience of government money printing directly results in the currency being debased over time. And who ultimately pays the price? Well, we do. The citizens foot the bill through inflation and the slow erosion of our hard-earned savings. According to the book, this cycle has been tried repeatedly throughout history, and spoiler alert, it consistently ends in economic disaster. Which leads us to Section 3, Solving for Digital Scarcity. To combat this cycle of infinite money, the author introduces the core technological breakthrough achieved by Satoshi Nakamoto. Here's the thing, making anything truly scarce is incredibly difficult. The book points out that even physical gold isn't perfectly scarce. I mean, if the price skyrockets, people will just deploy better technology to extract more of it from the ground. And in the digital world, scarcity was historically thought to be impossible because files are just effortlessly and endlessly duplicated. But the source argues that Bitcoin completely shattered this paradigm. 21 million. That's it. That is the absolute, hard-coded, unchangeable maximum supply of Bitcoins that will ever exist. No matter how high the price goes or how much insane computing power is added to the network, the protocol dictates there will never ever be more than 21 million. According to the book, this mathematical ceiling is exactly what makes it the world's first truly scarce digital commodity. Now, you might be wondering, wait, is 21 million units actually enough to build a global economy on? It's a valid question. Scarcity alone just isn't enough. Money also needs to be divisible. That is exactly why each single Bitcoin can be divided into 100 million smaller units, which are called Satoshis. This massive divisibility allows for incredibly small micropayments, meaning the whole system can actually scale to accommodate tiny, everyday transactions. But how do you process all those tiny transactions quickly? Well, the book explains that this is where Layer 2 technologies come in, like the Lightning Network. This network basically sits right on top of the main Bitcoin blockchain, and it's specifically designed so users can efficiently send rapid microtransactions. We're talking fractions of a cent across the globe instantly. It makes buying a cup of coffee totally possible without clogging up the base network. Section 4. A permissionless financial system. So the money is scarce and divisible, but the author argues that its lack of central control is what truly empowers people. When we contrast the two systems, the differences are just stark. The traditional financial system completely relies on trusted third parties. You know the drill. You need a bank account, an internet service provider, and you have to ask a gatekeeper for permission to move your own money, often paying high fees just to do it. The Bitcoin system, on the other hand, is entirely trustless and permissionless. It really doesn't care who you are. There's no founder, no overarching corporate board, and no government dictating who is allowed to send or receive funds. You just need a wallet. Getting rid of those gatekeepers has some absolutely incredible humanitarian applications. The source heavily emphasizes how this empowers marginalized groups. Think about women in restrictive countries who are legally excluded from holding traditional bank accounts. It also reaches remote villages completely lacking banking infrastructure. Amazingly, transactions can be completed using a simple text message, so you don't even need an internet provider, just a basic cell signal. Given that there are far more cell phones on Earth than bank accounts, the author argues this opens up entirely new, massive global markets. And finally, Section 5. Ponzi scheme or revolution. As we start wrapping up our explainer, we have to tackle the heavy skepticism that naturally surrounds a financial system this radically different. To actually appreciate the system, rather than just dismissing it out of hand, the author urges readers to really understand its key technical mechanics. Take the halving, for instance. Every 4 years, the reward that miners get for securing the network is automatically cut in half. This mathematically enforces the exact scarcity we talked about earlier by continuously lowering the inflow of new Bitcoin. It's completely automated, and it literally cannot be manipulated. Because, according to the book, you can't just glance at this technology and get it. Actually, the author suggests you need to spend anywhere from 10 to 100 hours studying very specific concepts: mining, proof of work, hash rate, the difficulty adjustment, and the halving. You really have to understand how a fully transparent open source network manages to operate continuously without ever being hacked and without being controlled by anyone. So ultimately, the Bitcoin standard leaves us staring at this massive, provocative dilemma. Once you strip away all the noise and truly understand the bare mechanics of a finite, decentralized digital asset, what are you actually looking at? Is it just a giant Ponzi scheme like the critics claim? Or could it genuinely be the biggest technological invention since the internet itself? The author challenges you to do the research, look closely at the mechanisms we've outlined today, and decide for yourself. What do you think the future of money really looks like?